Thank you for joining us and welcome to Answers Network. I'm your host, Alan Cardoza, and each week this show will address many ways of creating greater health, joy, and love for you and your family. And we will introduce you to top professionals and talented authors who are working to make this world a better place for all of us. Now, I'd really appreciate it if you could all do me a big favor. Please forward at least one of our shows to your social media group and to someone you know who can benefit from today's subject. This is one powerful way that we can make a positive difference together. Now, I'm glad to have with us again my guest co-host, Dr. Lydia Luna. She's the founder of Moon Collective Retreats. Lydia is a licensed clinical psychologist, and her background includes working in private practice with at-risk youth, children in the foster care system, and adults in residential level care and rehabilitation centers. And through her own healing work, Lydia has learned to use her barriers and hardships as a catalyst to continually search for meaning and purpose, which makes her an excellent host for today's show. Lydia has discovered that there is an infinite amount of power that we all are connected to, and we all hold it within. It's a love, a wisdom, and a strength that goes beyond our comprehension, and an ability to tap into this power once we understand the blocks and barriers that get in our way. Lydia, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to your valuable input on this very topical and important subject.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here and co-host with you and
All
speak
right.
with our
Well,
guests.
it's my pleasure. But before we get to our guest, can you share with us a little bit about what you've done during these trying times to help those in need come up with ways to thrive?
Yes, that's a really good question, and it's such a need right now, like you said. So I'm bringing together a group of practitioners and people that need some healing, and together we're creating a space that I call Moon Collective Retreats,
Mhm.
in which we offer people different healing modalities, such as sound healing, breath work, and soul discussion groups, is what I call it, which is kind of like group therapy. And it allows people the space to congregate, to have a sense of community, to receive support as well as give support, and also just learn these different healing modalities that are available, to tap into this infinite power that we're speaking of and helping them vibrationally and energetically. So it's really wonderful, and people are responding really well to that.
So, I mean, these retreats, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, share a little bit about not only what goes on there, but sort of the length of time that people, that if they want to get involved.
Yes. So we have 1 day retreats currently. They vary between a 3 hour retreat or a 6 hour retreat. And we're aiming to have those once a month. Right now, with the times, it's a little bit challenging, but as soon as things settle, we're planning on having our next one, hopefully, maybe late February. We'll see how things go, obviously. But it'd be great for people to just at least go into our website or our social media platforms to sign up for updates so they can be up to date on when we're going to have those. We also have a 3 day retreats. That's a weekend, Friday through Sunday. And the next one is planned for April, and that's going to be in Laguna Beach. And it's going to be wonderful. It's a perfect time to immerse oneself, especially after all this quarantining. So we're hoping that people join us and make some magic together.
I'm going to do everything I can to be there for that one because I'm really looking forward to it. So, how can those interested get more information? As far as is it best to go to your website, as you said, and if so, what is that website?
Yes, so our website is www.mooncollectiveretreats. We're also available through Instagram or Facebook with the same name, Moon Collective Retreats.
All right. And if you're out there, if you're driving or something and you couldn't write all that down, if you go to our website, if you go to the Answers for the Family website or the answers.network, we'll have all of Lydia's information on there. Thank you. Now, for everybody out there, I want all of you to know, and I know I mention this as often as I can, but it is truly important that you know how grateful I am that you take your time to listen to or now watch this show, and especially those that are sending in questions, comments, reviews, and suggestions, because please remember, this show it's meant for you. It exists for you. And so your comments, your questions is what leads us in the direction that we think is going to better help you and your family. And if you haven't gotten a copy of the Attitude of Gratitude Journal yet, please go to our website at answersforthefamily.com and download a copy. Give it 21 days and comment on whatever platform you listen to us on, what focusing on gratitude has meant to you and your family, and especially what it has meant to your family now, going through the things that we're going through. How is that bringing you closer together while there are other things going on in society that are focusing more on tearing people apart? So this is a way to really focus on gratitude and the things. Oh my God. I can't believe that this is happening, and I don't know how to close it. So my apologies. In fact, I usually remember to shut off mail so that it doesn't decide to talk to me in the middle of the show. So now we've quit mail and it won't talk to me anymore. So anyway, from that journal, well, actually, no, I have a quote, and it's not from that journal, but the journal has many quotes that I think many of you will like, from many incredibly famous people, as well as some that are from myself, from my son. But this particular quote that I thought was best for this show is not in the journal, but this one reads, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny." And that is by C.S. Lewis. And I think it is very apropos for today's show. Because with today's show, our topic is 10 ways to thrive in an unstable world. And our guest, Malcolm Stern, has worked as a group and individual psychotherapist for more than 30 years. He is co-director and co-founder of Alternatives at St. James Church in London and runs groups internationally. His approach involves finding where the heart is and helping individuals access their own truth. His London one-year group is the centerpiece of his work and has been successfully operating since 1990. In it, he creates an environment of trust, integrity, and community where participants can become skilled in relationships, communication, and managing difficult conversations. The ultimate learning is to slay your dragons with compassion. And Malcolm also co-presented the Channel 4 series on relationships called Made for Each Other in 2003 and 2004. His new book, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, describes 10 practices for thriving in an unstable world. The book is filled with practical exercises, which are combined with real and compelling stories directly from the therapy room. Malcolm, welcome to Answers for the Family.
Thank you so much, Alan.
All right. Well, I've enjoyed the book. I know that Lydia also had a chance to, and I can't really think of a better time, with everything that's going on, to be able to read this book. I think for anybody, it's just something that I think is incredibly helpful. I found it therapeutic, even with just the things that I'm going through. So thank you for that, first and foremost. And I think the other thing, to sort of set the context, because now having read the book and having learned a little bit more about you, I know a little more about you than I believe our listeners do. So to set that context, if you don't mind, can you share the story that you have said ignited the flame in your research into grief and how we can work through it?
Yeah. It's interesting because I never know when I tell the story whether I'm going to be in bits or whether I'm just going to sail through it, but emotions come upon me. So I'm not even asking people to excuse me for emotions, because actually I really welcome emotions. I welcome them in myself and I welcome them in others. And I went through one of the most terrible things that can happen to a human being and have come out the other side. I'm on my way out the other side with a lot of knowledge and some wisdom that's been born of suffering. And basically my oldest daughter, Melissa, was 33 years old and she took her own life. And you can't ever prepare for something like that. The signs were there in retrospect. I could see the depression coming on after a very hyperactive period, but I never ever dreamed it would go in that direction. And I learned about it when I was in the middle of running a group. I was in a 5-day residential at the end of my 1-year group. I had a phone call from Melissa's mother saying, Melissa's not with us anymore. And I said, we're not staying with you anymore. She said, no, she's not with us on earth anymore. And I went back into my group, and of course I had to tell people what was going on, even though I'm running the group. It was a group that had been together for a year, and one of my friends who was in the group as a psychotherapist took over the running, and he did a grief circle. And in that grief circle, he asked people who've lost a parent, please step forward. And about half the people in the group stepped forward. Those of you who've lost a sibling or a close friend, please step forward. Maybe a third of the people. Those of you who've lost a child, step forward. And that was just me. And suddenly at that moment, it landed, because the shock when we hear really horrendous news often inures us from getting really penetrated by the enormity of what's happened. And in that moment it landed, and I looked around and tears were flowing down my face, and I felt the compassion of this group. And for that session, the time was mine, with the permission and welcoming of the group. And I never take space in my own groups. I feel like that's absolutely out of order, but there was nothing else I could do. Mm-hmm. And that thus began a journey. I wrote a poem, which I posted on Facebook as a way of letting people know I'm not a great poet, but it came from the heart, and it sort of it allowed me to sort of inform people what had happened. And I started a journey that was pretty horrendous, and most horrendous to my other children, who are Melissa's half brother and sister, mm-hmm. who went through enormous suffering in the process, and their mother, Amanda, who was Melissa's stepmother, who was amazing in terms of supporting me. And I went through in a place where I had to go to that place inside myself, whereas I'd avoided mental illness like the plague. My sister, Beverly, and I was 18 years old, and I was still living with my parents, and so was she. She was in The Sound of Music on the West End stage, and Susan George was my sister's understudy. And she had a breakdown, and she went really out of it. And I remember her screaming, "The taxi drivers are coming to burn the house down." I went, "Oh my God, this is horrendous." And she was just she'd completely lost it, and she went through an enormous breakdown. And I kept well clear of that. So my work as a psychotherapist, I prided myself on working with the people who are into self-development, but I avoided mental illness like the plague. And then mental illness came and sought me out. And since then, it's been a roller coaster journey, which has educated me. Bridget Bowen, who runs a conference called Compassionate Mental Health in the UK, invited me to come and host her gatherings. And she had no idea about Melissa. She just knew I was a group facilitator. And I tell Melissa's story at each of those gatherings. And it's a way of setting the scene. And I allow my feelings to flow. And I thought I was going to educate people. And what happened is there were a lot of people who were in the mental health system, and they educated me. I ran a workshop called Telling Our Stories, and people would share their stories of mental breakdown and horrendous happenings to them. There were also health professionals, and these gatherings were like a tribe that gathered in the name of mental health. And we only ever had one main rule. The main rule was no one gets classified. No one is a schizophrenic. No one is a manic depressive. No one is bipolar. These people have suffered, and they are on a journey in their suffering. And we created community. And lots of things like that happened. And then in 2017, which was 3 years after Melissa took her life, a friend of mine called Ben Crabe and I just sat together and sort of like started talking about what it would be like to write a book. And I was going to write this book about the empath's journey, because Melissa was highly empathic. And I started to go down that road, and it didn't work. And then I approached Watkins, who are my publishers, and they said, here's a form, fill it in, and you'll find out what the book's about. And it was amazing. I filled it in and I found out what the book was about. And what it was about, I've always hated 10 ways to thrive and 8 ways to reach, or whatever it is. And I've always rebelled against that. But I realized there were practices that I had taken on that I was actually being educated by myself. I realized I'd written my own manual, but also that I was offering practices for other people about what you can do when life feels so enormously impossible, what you can do to resource yourself and work through. And so this has been a journey for me. It's now 6 years since Melissa died, and I feel like I felt her spirit. I'm definitely not into the mystic side of things, but I felt her spirit guide me all the way through writing the book. It just flowed. My first book took 4 years to write. This took 7 months. Once we got the framework, it just kept coming and coming and coming, and the book, it feels like it wrote itself.
Well, I mean, thank you for sharing that story, and your sharing that story has brought in a question from one of our listeners, and this one reads, losing a child is a devastating event in one's life. My sister lost her only child, her son, in a car accident. Her grief has been almost unbearable, and now she has used the COVID excuse to avoid the entire family. Says, I purchased your book and I'm looking forward to reading it in the hope that it may give me insight on how to help her. Can you tell me, what you would suggest we do for a loved one who is withdrawing from life? And this is from Gloria in Minnesota.
That's a great question. And I think the most important thing is never to push someone in the direction we feel they ought to go, but to make invitations and inquiries into what's going on. And what your loved one needs is obviously compassion and care. And for her to know that it's safe to explore this area. And it takes a lot to go down this road of exploration. In my case, it took me a long time till I could get in tune. One of the things that really helped me, which might really help your sister, is that I went to a group which was specifically run for people who'd been bereaved by suicide. Now there'll be other groups which are people who've lost their children, for example. It doesn't have to be a suicide group, but this was a suicide group. And what I learned in doing that group is that other people were going through a similar experience, and it was so nourishing for me to actually experience what their situations were. And I would say that if you could do a little bit of research for her and see what's around in her area, and maybe just sort of have a connection and make it really important to say, I don't want to force you anywhere, and you may not be ready for this now, but actually a little further down the trail, I've got your back and I'm in your corner and I care so deeply about you. Let that be the invitation that you give, rather than, well, why don't you try this, or let's get out and do that. And the book, which I hope you'll enjoy, it may be something that you pass on to your sister, because the book is something that does list very simple practices. And I've found these practices so valuable in my own life.
Thank you for that. And Lydia, what would be some things you might add?
What I actually wanted to add is that something that really resonated with me, Malcolm, in reading your book is that I've actually also lost a loved one to suicide. I was dating somebody for almost 5 years, and towards the end, it was something nobody was expecting. There were no signs at that time. And like you said, retrospectively, like now we're seeing, okay, there were some signs, but when you're living day to day, it's so difficult to really know. He never gave any indication that he was suicidal. He was the happiest person, etc. Right? But so anyway, it really triggered this journey of healing and trying to understand, and it really just shifted who I am and who I become. But something that I would like maybe to talk about for people that are going through any kind of loss, whether it's a divorce, a lot of people are breaking up now after, being under this isolation or quarantining for a year, almost a year. There's just a lot of loss in every perspective. A lot of people are losing people from COVID. So there's just this feeling of a lot of loss. What would you tell people about how to manage this loss? Because what I'm hearing a lot of people say is, what's happening? Why is this happening? Or when am I going to feel better? And why do I feel like this? It's already been a while, or I wanted this divorce or separation. Why am I so sad? So what can you tell people that have lost someone through, death or separation or divorce, in terms of just letting the process take its course, and how long does it take, and how do they find meaning and purpose?
At Alternatives, we at one stage we put on it Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I don't know if you know of her work.
Yeah.
And she talked about the process of loss, which I found really interesting. And what she said is that in the grieving process, there's 6 months of intensity and 18 months of recovery. Now, this is arbitrary, and it could be slightly different, but it gave a time frame rather than, okay, well, it's been a week, let's get over it. There is any loss will involve a period of mourning. And if we're wise, we'll allow the mourning to educate us, and we'll allow ourselves to be stripped, to be pulled open by whatever it is, and something in us changes and can never be the same again. And it's often really good. And I look back at how I am since Melissa died, I'm deeper. I'm more caring of my other children. It's like I have switched on because I have been really battered by something. And I feel like I've really honored the process. For me, writing the book was the ultimate catharsis of the process. And I think there's something about journaling, there's something about meditation. And what I find really valuable in grieving that we're talking about here is what I call in the book, getting us our Sangha around us, which is a Buddhist term for spiritual community. And the one-year groups I run are Sanghas. People often have lifelong friendships that come from those groups because there's a practice of speaking authentically, of allowing our emotions to be where they're at, of actually sort of honoring feedback and of not judging. So there's all those practices. And if we can create little Sanghas around us, little communities around us of like-minded others, that can be an immense support on the journey.
Malcolm, and one of the things that you mentioned in the book, and I think it ties right into what you're talking about with Sanghas, has to do with listening skills. And it feels like it started before COVID, but people don't seem to be listening. I mean, this whole thing, and maybe it has to do with, social media and everything else. Everybody wants to have an opinion. Everybody wants to say something, but I feel like people aren't taking the time to listen. They're more interested in getting their thoughts out, or their opinion, or whatever it is that's going on in their life. What can we do to improve the way in which we listen to each other so that we can honor and empower that connection?
I think the word that comes to me, Alan, is consciousness. We can be conscious about what it is we're doing. And there was a book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
I read it.
Which was a best-selling book. It's a great book.
Yeah.
And one of the habits is seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. And for me, there's something so powerful about not having to get my bit in immediately, but actually really tuning in to what's going on for the other person. And I think it involves a wanting to listen. It's not an easy thing. It's a simple skill, but it's a skill that involves practice. Notice when you're just, rabbiting on, or when someone's speaking and you're going through your shopping list or your mind, and you're already preparing your response. Make it a practice to make eye contact, to breathe deeply, to slow yourself down, to tune in to the other person, just to get a sense of who it is you're listening to. And often, if they really feel heard, they'll go a level deeper, and you'll find that what they're sharing is really profound. At the end of the day, no one's boring. Boring is often because we actually we don't get listened to, and we're just so desperate to speak whatever it is that's there. But if we're truly listened to, I feel like we can uncover gold inside ourselves.
That's beautiful. And so, Lydia, what are some of the things that you have found along those same lines, especially as COVID is hit and things like that, with people not really taking this time to really listen?
What comes to mind is, everybody's struggling right now. Everybody's going through difficulties. And so maybe there is that need to connect and express oneself and share. And many times we do forget, what about the other person? How are they doing? Right. So I do believe it's important to, if you want to be heard, that's fine. You need that, well, you should get that need met, but also consider the other person and practicing compassion, as Malcolm was sharing. I think part of it is, if we really pay attention, we're all having similar experiences, maybe through different avenues or in different ways, but there's a way to connect. So if you listen and share in an authentic way, we'll find some commonality in our interactions. And then maybe it doesn't feel like a task to listen, but rather a way to connect with the other person.
You know,
say something, Alan, just before you come in. I was watching you listening to Luna, and I thought that was a really good piece of modeling. So if people are watching this on Facebook Live, or they're re-watching it again,
yeah,
they'll observe that you actually were really present in that moment of really tuning into us. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just didn't want to.
Oh, but thank you for that. I appreciate that. And one of the thoughts has to do with speaking our truth, and you talk about it in the book. And what connection might there be between us focusing more, if we're speaking the truth, are we going to get more people to listen? You know, there's so much of this misinformation and stuff that's going on out there. But I think because at that point in time, what you're talking about, I'm listening to Lydia because I know she's speaking the truth. I'm listening to you because I know you're speaking the truth. And it's something that to me, just it comes out with integrity. And so I'm enthralled, and I'm glad that you saw that. But if we can get people, in other words, you know, how can we push the right buttons that then causes listening by showing integrity, speaking truth? How much can we make those things work together?
I think it's easier when you're listening to someone who is clearly passionate, knowledgeable, or wise around the issues that they're exploring. It's much more difficult if someone's all over the place. Now, when I'm running groups, often people will tell their story, and I talk about it as like turning the radio on and then out comes the story. But I'm actually not interested in the story, although sometimes they're fascinating. What I'm interested in is what's behind the story. And if I'm really willing to listen, and I also instruct the group in this way as well, and say, just get present. And so really get present. And even if you're watching this show right now, see if you can really be present. Can you sit well? Can you breathe well? Can you keep a connection with us rather than planning ahead for something that's going on later? Just get present, and then you'll start to hear things that maybe you won't hear so easily. And one of the great practices that I'm involved with is speaking from authenticity. I grew up with a mother who told white lies, and she would always do it for the right motive. She would never want someone to be hurt. So I was on my way to Prague once, and I was very small when I was. Can I tell this little story? Is that
Please do.
Okay, great. So I was very small when I was sort of 13 years old, and I was like the titch in the class, and my mother took me to a doctor to get growth hormones to help me grow, and I grew 5 inches in a year, and suddenly became normal height, which was amazing because I was no longer this little pipsqueak. And I was on my way to Prague to run a workshop, and I looked at a newspaper, and it said that people had been developing Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease 30 years on from getting these growth hormones, and it was involving them in paralysis, in blindness, in mental disorder, and ultimately in death. And I went, oh my God. And these were the years in which it was happening, and I was right in the middle of those years, because they were using hormones from dead bodies, and they'd gone terribly wrong within the bodies. And I went back. I worked in a medical practice at the time, and I went back to the medical practice when I came back from Prague. I rang my mother, and she said, "No, you didn't have them. Your sister had them." And I went, "No, I definitely had. I remember." But I went back to the medical practice where I was working, and I saw that the doctor took it really seriously, who I spoke to, and was ready to refer me to a sort of specialist unit a long way out in the country. And I remembered the name of the doctor who treated me. I thought, he's got to be 90 years old if he's still around. But I thought, I'll see if I can find him. So I sort of, it was pre-internet days then. So I looked in the phone directory and found this guy was still living where he was. I rang him up and I said, hello, Dr. Swire. I said, you won't remember me, but you gave me growth hormones in 1963. He said, I didn't use growth hormones. I used anabolic steroids. And so I actually found the truth of that, and it was the biggest relief in my life. But my mother was trying to protect me by not telling the truth. And all it did was it made me distrust her. So we have to learn how to tell the truth, but also how to tell the truth with compassion.
I think that's a great point. So along those lines, and I know you talk about it in the book in regards to some of the practices that we can do. So one of your practices, obviously, tell the truth, do it with integrity. But what are some other practices that we can do to improve and sort of, enliven our intimate relationships so that we don't have those situations like you're talking about, to where people are starting to doubt what we're saying because we've been sort of skirting the truth for a while?
I think for me, the number one practice that I've got in the book is creating this Sangha, is having around you a support system of like-minded others, so that you actually have a space where you are getting met on a regular basis. Now, every Monday morning, a friend of mine and I spend an hour on Zoom, and we take half an hour each to talk about what's going on in our lives, 20 minutes each, and then 10 minutes of reflection. And whatever comes is whatever comes. It's a really precious space because we are making a practice of feeding back honorably and honestly with each other. I also have a triad. There's 3 of us that meet once a fortnight. And again, that's a place where we share what's going on for us and we get reflection from the others. I'm also part of a men's group where there is a real practice of truth. So I've created structures in my life where I have a support for speaking truth. And most of my friendships are based very much on that. Otherwise, why would they be my friends? So for me, that's the first criteria, is get yourself supported. Build yourself a structure to do it, and then look at ways in which you are going to up your game. So for example, in relationships, notice the times when you are blaming your partner rather than owning what's going on for you. When you want to make the other wrong, and make that a practice to go, what's happening for me? So rather than, you bastard, you said that to me, it's like, wow, that hurts. Or something along those lines, that you start to take ownership of your own feelings and your own projections. This is a long process. This is a lifelong process. But I actually believe that there is a need for us to develop ourselves, because we don't want to live in a crazy world for the rest of our lives. We want to help create, as you said at the top of the show, you said we want to help create a better world. And I think that when we do this work, we don't just do it for ourselves, we do it for the world.
And now, do you call these groups, you call them Sanghas? So for the people that maybe aren't comfortable with trying to set something like this up, are there existing Sangha groups that people can look up and join them that are already in place?
Well, I think there are men's groups, there are women's groups, there are psychotherapy groups, there are counseling groups, there are all sorts of groups that are around. And I think if we really want to find something, we start to put out our radar, and then you never know what's going to come your way. But put it out that actually you're interested in finding something. And I believe that you have a good shot at it. Now, I ran a Sangha group for alternatives, which I'm doing a 3-part series for alternatives which is alternatives.org.uk. I'm doing a 3-part series on Zoom, starting in February, three Monday evenings. And in that group, one of my clients came to the group and she said, I really want to find a Sangha, but I haven't got a clue where to go. And we split the group into small groups for some of the practices. And she came across a woman who I also knew really well, who I'd used to work with. And they just clicked. And they have established a pattern now where they are speaking once a week for an hour and really sharing their lives with each other. And she is so uplifted from having gone to this Sangha. We can also go and sit at the feet of people who have something to teach us. People like Jack Cornfield or Ram Dass or Thich Nhat Hanh, the people who've inspired me in some of their Tara Brach, in the ways that they operate. So we can start to put ourselves in environments where these are the practices.
Now, you gave a website to go to. Can you repeat that? I didn't get a chance to write it down, and I want to put it on our site. So for those people that are driving or something and they can't get that down, so that they can find it. What was that site again?
That's kind of you, Alan. That's www.alternatives.org.uk. And if you go to that site, you'll see the. And I'm also doing 3-part series on relationships for another group starting in March called Conscious Cafe. And if you go to Conscious Cafe, I think it's .co.uk, you'll see details of that group on relationships. So I'm very interested in the ongoing learning, not the one-offs, but the groups where we do 3 or 4 groups or a year group, because we're actually starting to trust the energy of the group over that period of time.
Okay. And also, I know that you also have malcolmstern.com, and I would imagine all of these will be listed there.
Unfortunately, I'm so lazy. Not yet. So it's a really good reminder, though, Alan, and I need to get them on there. Yes, thank you.
Well, now you have to. And actually, and I'd like Lydia to add to this, because what we talked about in the very beginning with her retreats, it's what you're talking about. It is people getting together and having somebody there to facilitate things that sort of keep us on track as to what do we really need to work on. And I think that's another thing that's important that I kind of like both of you to talk about, is how important the facilitator is in these situations. Because sometimes people think, well, hey, I'm going to get together with a bunch of my buddies, we're all going to meet at the bar and we're going to talk about some things, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but the value that comes with having somebody trained who's a facilitator, if you could explain a little bit about that for those that might not have gone through something.
Yeah, well, something that I wanted to highlight is, before I get to that, is that, we usually tend to want to protect our loved ones, right? So when it comes to being honest and authentic, we think, well, I don't want to say this to somebody I care about. I don't want to hurt their feelings, or I don't want to offend, or what if I say it in the wrong way, etc. So like how Malcolm was sharing, we start telling white lies, right? Or we're not as open and honest and disclosing. But what that's doing is it's creating distance or a barrier between you and the other person that you truly care about and that you want to connect with, right? So you think you're protecting the person by maybe not being as authentic, but it's not a protection. It's actually it can harm the relationship instead. And it leaves people feeling really lonely in relationships because they don't feel understood. They don't feel heard. So for me, what I think is the magic about groups is that it creates a safe space for people to practice how to be authentic, how to tell your truth. And it could be challenging in its own way, obviously, because you're disclosing to people you may not be super close with, but there's also some relief in that because you are able to share more without that feeling of, oh my God, I'm not going to lose their love, right? So it's twofold in a sense. But what I love is that that's what groups do. It creates magic in a way that it creates a safe space, and having a facilitator there to kind of guide the conversations or help elicit or extract or just make observations, So if there's somebody that tends to be quieter and likes to be more of an observer, the facilitator maybe will just highlight that and try to get the person to engage more in a sense. Or the most beautiful thing is when the facilitator does the least work and the group itself encourages one another and supports one another. And so that's the beautiful part, because then the magic is being created within the group. So maybe Malcolm, you can speak more on that.
Well, that's great. It's really beautifully put, Lydia. And I taught a long time ago at a place called the Esalen Institute in Big Sur in California. And they had 4 golden rules for facilitators, and I love these rules. The first is show up. The second is be present. The third is trust the process. And the fourth is get out of the way. And I think that's the art of facilitation. And you talked of the word magic. I use the word magic and alchemy because I think that when a facilitator is really in their power, and I'm not talking about an ego power, I'm talking about if they're really in a place where they are committed to that group process and helping it unravel, it becomes magical and things happen that you wouldn't dream about. And I'm sure you know that from your groups as well. hear from the way you're describing it that actually this is a place you experience. It's one of the things I'm missing most in this lockdown period, that I'm not running face-to-face groups, I'm running Zoom groups, and it's not the same.
All right. All right. Well, we're talking with Malcolm Stern and we're talking with Dr. Lydia Luna, and our topic is 10 ways to thrive in an unstable world. We're going to take a break, but we're going to be right back. When we come back, Malcolm, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how we can tune our elusive sixth sense. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Again, this is Answers for the Family and Answers Network.
Founded over 30 years ago to meet the needs of families in crisis, West Shield has continually focused on resolving issues that negatively impact families and businesses. Our signature therapeutic transportation service helps to ensure that adolescents in crisis are safely transported to specialized schools, programs, and treatment centers with unsurpassed experience and success. We are supported by our full-service licensed investigation agency that has legally, professionally, and compassionately located hundreds of runaways and teens. We are experienced and qualified to help, offering solutions which may include referrals to our international network of top professionals in the fields of educational consulting, psychology, psychiatry, and investigations. Simply put, West Shield Adolescent Services and West Shield Investigations are the best solutions when your family is facing a personal crisis. Call 1-800-899-8585, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 1-800-899-8585, or visit our website at westshield.com. Thank you.
And we're back. You're listening to and or watching Answers Network. With me today as my guest co-host is Dr. Lydia Luna, and our guest is Malcolm Stern. And when we went to break, I asked Malcolm a little bit about our elusive sixth sense. And I know you talk about it in the book, but what does it mean to tune into this, and how can we strengthen it? And I love the fact that you talked about it is I think about it like a muscle now. How can we work this out so that we can build it and make it even stronger?
I think it needs a lot of strengthening. And I because I've been running groups for about 35 years, I've had to practice this elusive sixth sense when I'm working with someone. If I'm trying to work it out cognitively, I'm not going to do the same work with them as if I allow myself to follow them and go where it is they're leading with their work, and then find ways of pulling them in a certain direction. Then I'm using that sixth sense. What I realized when I wrote the book is that I've been strengthening this muscle for 3 decades or more. Mm-hmm. And actually that muscle works quite well in me. I hope that's not sounding arrogant. It's just that no. I'm not a thinker so much. I'm more of a feeler. And so I can't put down sort of like a very sort of intellectual document. But what I can do is talk about what I've sensed and what I've felt. And there's things that we can do to tune in our sixth sense. There's those times when we're about to step off the curb and a car comes around the corner and somehow we've stepped back and we didn't even know why we're stepping back. Or we're thinking about someone and they'll ring us. And I find that, Carl Jung said that everything is synchronicity. And if we were to start to trust that process of synchronicity, we start to, because I think the first thing is about trusting this sixth sense, because we want to go to the mind. We want to think it through. We want to find a way of having the mind work out the answers. And usually the mind doesn't work out the answers. It comes to some clever solution, but it doesn't tune in at a deeper level. So for me, the sixth sense is ultimately about tuning into what the mystics have called the still small voice within, or our access to the divine, or our access to our higher selves, or our access to higher consciousness. And for me, that's an ongoing, lifelong practice, not to try and think it through, but to allow it to feel its way through in me and to tune into how I can do it. Now, for me, meditation is absolutely a prerequisite for this, because stilling myself on a daily basis every morning is absolutely essential for me to feel like I'm starting the day in such a way that there's a feeding to this part of me. The sixth sense will also tune in when you allow yourself to really meet another. So if I really look at you as you speak, and then get a sense of what's going on in you, and not to try and name it, but to try and sense it. There's a great book by Robert Heinlein called Stranger in a Strange Land, and he uses this wonderful word grok. Grok is to really know something at a deep level, way beyond consciousness and way beyond the intellectual understanding. And I think we have to learn to grok each other. We have to learn to tune into each other and really see who's there. What are they really trying to say? And there's a beauty in actually sort of allowing ourselves to be led in that direction. So, you know, each day is a fresh experience, and we can tune into the day and see what the day is demanding of us, or each meeting we have, what's it demanding of us?
Yeah. Well, I hope that I don't get slapped in the face if I walk up to someone and say, hi, I'd like to grok with you.
Yeah. Malcolm, so I think what comes to mind for me as you were speaking is that, you know, fear can get in the way of this sixth sense or gut feeling or intuition, because like you said, we use the mind. So if we have a feeling, maybe I shouldn't do this, or maybe I should do that, sometimes we try to rationalize it, and sometimes fear just comes up and they're afraid of what can go wrong. So how would you slay that dragon, the fear that comes in?
First, recognize that you're frightened. Then deal with the fear. Then sort of either talk to someone about it, or take charge of your own fear. Breathe more deeply. This is an easy practice that actually, if we find ourselves spinning out, the first thing that happens is often that the breath shortens. So if we can notice that our breath is shortening, and we can then start to slow down and follow our breathing, we start to stop the fear driving us, because fear will stop us from intuiting. Yeah. And the other thing is we can do is talk to people about it. You know, have your Sangha or have your close friends. And very often people haven't tuned into their Sangha, but their Sangha is right there on their doorstep. You know, it might be a close friend. They've never really talked about what's what with them. I remember a doctor friend of mine going to a homeopathic conference and meeting another doctor there he'd known for 25 years, and neither of them knew that they were both into homeopathy. They'd kept it because they were frightened that they would be judged for that. So look at the places where you might go where you're not going to be judged, and see if you can get tuned into and build your musculature, your emotional musculature, so that actually you can go to those places more easily.
I have a question in regards to how much of the journey to thrive is how we look at things. And I'm reminded of a quote by Abraham Lincoln, who said, "We can complain because rose bushes have thorns, or we can rejoice because thorn bushes have roses." You know, so it seems as though there's been this massive shift to look at things in a doom and gloom sort of way that seems to be affecting, our sanity, and increasing depression and things like that. So how much of the journey, to thrive is just turning around how we think of it?
I think that's a really great question, Alan, because actually I think there are two viruses going on. There's the actual physical virus that's happening, and then there's the mental virus that's happening. And I notice when I go walking in the mornings, I've got this beautiful walk near my house, and some people will not meet my eyes. Some people will hold a stick out to make sure that I'm 2 meters away from them. And actually, some people will smile and connect. And I think if we allow fear to dominate us, we start to lose our sense of humanity. And so I think there's a real practice here about keeping our hearts open, and you definitely take precautions, but it doesn't mean you have to close your heart to people.
Mm-hmm. So we've probably got about time for about one more question. Lydia, is there a particular question you want to cover?
Yeah, so one of them is, as a death-phobic society, how can we face our own and others' mortality with dignity and wisdom?
I was out with a friend this morning walking, and she's had cancer, serious cancer, for 5 years, and was expected to die some years ago. And she said, "We're all going to die." And actually, what it's done to me is it's actually brought me closer to going, I'm going to die at some point, but I'm not going to live my life denying that death. And I'll talk to people who can hear me about the process that I'm going through. And I thought there's incredible courage and dignity in the way that she did that. So I think what we can do is actually start to recognize we're all mortal. We're on a short visit to planet Earth. Let's make the most of this visit. But also when it's our time to go, let's see if we can really resource ourselves in ways like that. And there's a great book which is called The 5 Invitations by Frank Ostarzewski, which is all about, he set up the Zen hospice in San Francisco, and it's all about the practices that we can undertake to face death in ourselves and others.
Great. Thanks for recommending that.
All right. And I just want to try and squeeze another one in here. This is another one that was sent in to us. This one says, my daughter phoned in to me the other day to tell me that she and her friends have decided to ignore the lockdown, and with proper precautions, they intend to start having more get-togethers. She states that the sadness and negativity that has been isolated is far worse than the virus on the human psyche. And I think you've just spoke about it, but it says, I wonder if you feel, as she does, that it's time to stop the madness and get on with our life. And this is from Naomi in Utah.
I think, again, it's such a great, there's some wonderful questions coming here, Alan. And I think it's such a great question, because actually we have to balance it. We do have to stay safe. I've had the virus, by the way, and I had it quite badly back in March of last year. Not the hospitalization stage, but night sweats for 2 weeks, loss of taste, loss of appetite, and all of that. And once I stopped being frightened of it, I started to go, okay, well, I have an illness, and I've got to work with this. And what I also can see is that we need to be wise in keeping distance from people, but that doesn't mean we need to keep miles away. So maybe we could have outdoor gatherings. I don't know what the rules are where you are, but maybe you could be at outdoor gatherings where people are smiling at each other, where they're sharing with each other, where they're actually allowing community to not be decimated by the fear that the virus brings.
All right. Well, I just really want to thank you and acknowledge you for, first of all, you're sharing a huge vulnerability with everybody in hopes that they're going to be able to get benefit from it. And I think that that's one of the most honorable things that any of us can do. So thank you for that, and putting the book out at a time in which we really need it. So again, just thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for the book.
The book, by the way.
And yeah, there's the book. And again, it's, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. You can get it at any bookstore, but you can also go to either Malcolm's website, or if you go to our website, we'll have more information on that as well.
Just to say that people like Eckhart Tolle have endorsed the book, Elizabeth Gilbert, Jack Cornfield, Craig David. A lot of people have seen the book and were touched by the stories in it. So I was so touched by that.
Yeah, as we were as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
And Alan Cardoza and Lydia Luna as well. So I'll add those to my list now. So.
There you go. Yeah, please do. And Lydia, thank you so much for taking the time. And again, for anybody, if you need more information in regards to the retreats or just to get a hold of Lydia, we'll have all of her information on the website as well. Just go to answersforthefamily.com. Or Lydia, what would be the more direct way?
And that's the best way, is just go to the website. There's a tab where you can enter your contact information, and we can always call you or email you.
Great. Thank you so much. And for everybody, tune in next week when we're going to be joined by Sergey Khalili King, author of Dreaming Techniques, How to Master the Art of Dreaming. So for everybody, please visit our archives of past interviews at answersforthefamily.com or answers.network, and subscribe to our show through iTunes, iHeart, Stitcher, YouTube, Spreaker, Instagram, SoundCloud. I have a wonderful producer that keeps adding more platforms for us, but it's so we can bring this to you. And if you like what you hear, please leave a review. It will help us reach more people, and we are going to greatly appreciate it. Next time you're on Facebook or Twitter, please remember to stop by our page, check out some of the latest posts. If you like them, please like us and spread the word. So for everybody out there, be good human beings, and be with us again next week on Answers.network.
You're listening to Answers for the Family with Alan Cardoza, right here on LA Talk Radio.